What still attracts them, the military service?
Well, I'm thankful that that's the case. And, you know, we had folks right here that stepped forward. It's a variety of things, actually. There isn't one. And you talk to folks at the United States Military Academy, you talk to folks at basic training, and they'll give you any number of reasons why they raised their right hand to serve. I'm just thankful that we still are able to bring people forward and to volunteer. And I think that it's important that for the character of our country, that we be a people that believe in ourselves.
Have you read the book or seen the movie Lone Survivor?
I've seen the movie.
What do you make of it?
It's uncanny in how realistic it was done.
To
Having said
put
that,
young Americans in the position of having to make that call.
well, let me just say this, and I think you just raised another point. Part of the reason why the movie, I think, is so realistic is because they retained the guy who survived. He's the principal advisor for the movie.
Yeah.
You know, as you're watching it, you know, I just was thinking, oh, geez. As I was watching, I hadn't read the book. I'm like, oh, bring him up to the top of the hill. You know, because I'm thinking, you know, they were right. Obviously, as Americans, they made the right choice not to shoot. I mean, that's what an American does. American does the right thing, you know. But I wish they would have walked him up to the top of the hill. And when the helicopters land, that's when you let him loose. You know, but you know, I have to tell you this, that you know, as I think about the last 12 years, I just hope we've learned from all this, because we've got to do better than this. I mean, we absolutely will protect this cherished way of life, but we cannot redo this. We have to learn from what just happened here. We don't need to do it this way.
Knowing what you know now from your service in Congress, what we've seen over the last 12 years, would you now go back, if you were to go back, do anything differently as a commander?
Well, I mean, the answer to that is obviously yes. I mean, I'm a perfectionist. I'm always trying to do better. Every day that I rose, I was always looking to learn, to listen. I mean, what I'm very proud of the fact is that when you look on my Facebook, you'll see my enlisted men write to me at least as much as my officers, probably more. And I credit the fact that I came from a working class family and I started as a private. So even when I rose to colonel and brigade command, I never forgot what it was like. And so as I exercised my command, I learned things every day from privates and from sergeants about how it was to move forward. And, you know, those were very hard times. I mean, my second tour to Iraq, my first tour after 9/11 particularly, we were in near daily gunfights. And we lost good Americans that are never coming back, and there's a hole in their family that'll never be filled. And that hurts. That hurts. But I will tell you that we never forget them. We will always love them. And I'm still in touch with the families. And I pledged then that if I was ever in a position of authority, that I would help educate my colleagues about the impact of these decisions. You know, it doesn't mean that I'm not a pacifist, I'm a realist. But my goodness, you
No
know,
one knows war like a soldier.
the threshold of making these decisions and putting our young men and women in combat, it better be really important to do that.
You served in the southwestern United States on what I think was a drug interdiction
Yeah.
detail at one point.
Yeah.
What do you make of the 20 states that have now legalized marijuana and Governor Cuomo's push to make marijuana available for medical use?
Well, you know, first of all, you know, the idea of dealing with pain is one that I understand and empathize with. I'm concerned about the direction that they're choosing in this case to deal with that. You know, I now serve 11 counties. I used to serve 10. I will tell you that what keeps me up at night is this scourge of heroin, about what's going on. Young folks, really folks of all ages, and it's such a addicting drug, and it is causing such a scourge that my concern is moving down an avenue that opens gateway for this. Look, I know it's a complicated issue, and I yield that point. I'm just saying that with an eye towards dealing with pain, are there ways that we can do that that don't end up exacerbating a very serious situation? And let me give you an example how unintended consequences can happen for legislators. So, last summer in the state, we passed a bill that seemed like it was a good idea. We passed ISTOP. ISTOP was cracking down on the overprescription of narcotics. What happened is there wasn't a dimension of the law that dealt with those that may have been on these prescription drugs for years and were addicted. We're seeing them in the street now. These are professionals. These are folks that you would never confuse for anybody that you might think would be a drug addict. But they were on prescription drugs for a long time, and with iStop, they weren't getting access to a prescription drug anymore. And so they were buying a $40 pill on the street. Or, after doing that for a period of time, decided they were going to buy a $6 bag of heroin. And now, we've got folks that are hooked on a very pernicious drug that is a dead end. Literally, can be towards death. So, look, I'm dealing with sheriffs right now. I'm holding coordination meetings. I'm trying to be helpful. I recognize that the federal law here is not that extensive, but however, what I can be is a conduit for best practices. So, we're going to bring together 11 sheriffs, and we're going to talk about it, because the sheriffs are dealing with it every day.
Let's open up the conversation. I know that we were going to make index cards available with some questions. Everybody collect the index cards. We have questions for the audience. All right.
Let me say this as we're gathering it up. Yeah, I think Hillary's going to be a formidable candidate, but I'm also optimistic that our party will win in 2016. But we can't underestimate the fact that Hillary's going to be a challenging candidate. And you probably have surmised that I think our best candidate is probably going to be a governor of some kind. You probably deduced that by the responses of who I said maybe to.
All right. What steps can be taken to restore the balance of power between the three branches of government?
It's a great question.
As designed in our Constitution.
Listen, I think this is a really important issue, and I think it's one that transcends party. I'm the author of a bill that would ensure that you get a voice before we go to war. It's called the War Powers Reform Act, H.R. 383, and it's a bipartisan bill. There are 45 of us on the bill, including 10 Democrats, and I think this is an illustration because what's happened, particularly since the advent of the nuclear age, is that we've consolidated the war powers into the executive branch. And presidents from both political parties have taken us off to war without the consent of the government. And, we've got to change that. So I will tell you, this is hard because my own speaker doesn't agree with me. I mean, there are Republicans who like the idea of empowering the president like that. And I am doing my very best to convince them. And I've had moments of leverage. I mean, the Syria situation allowed for that leverage to explain. And Democrats, the concern of Democrats is they don't want to be seen as criticizing the president. I get that too. 10 Democrats have come forward and have seen the sincerity in what I'm doing. This is not something new. I mean, I taught this at the United States Military Academy. My dissertation looks at national security decision making, and you heard me say that at my very core, I believe that the countervailing forces are at the center of how we live best as humans. So, I think that this is, an important issue for us, that we have to find a way to use language that is not partisan on this, that shows the virtue of restoring to the people the sovereignty that was always intended with the founding era. Of course, remembering that Article 1 of the Constitution, pride and place, was given to the Congress. So I think we've got a ways to go on this, and it's not just the war powers, but it has to do with legislation. And what I'd love to see, I would love to see the presidential candidate that takes this on as an issue. The presidential candidate that says that I'm going to be the president that's going to help rebalance this. That's going to say, I'm going to sign a War Powers Reform Act. That I'm going to actually, what I'd love to see is a president that goes to the Congress. You know, we have seen this pageantry of a State of the Union. Now, keep in mind where this came from. We wrote this in the Constitution, that from time to time the president shall report on the State of the Union. Well, you know, the initial presidents didn't deliver a speech. They wrote it, and they sent it to him. And Jefferson in particular was known to have a very high-pitched voice. And he's one of the greatest writers we've ever had. Well, Woodrow Wilson, we have him to thank. You know, he started giving the speech, and what's happened today is it's become more about pageantry and political posturing than it's meant anything. What I'd love to see is the president use that moment instead of one moment. Why not we should use something similar to what they use in Great Britain in this regard. Not in all regards, but in this regard. They have prime minister's questions. I'd like to see the executive come before the Congress, humble him or herself, and the reason is because we're all servants. We work for the people. So the president should bring his cabinet down to the well of the House and stand for questions, just like I'm doing now with you. That's what should happen.
That would do more for PBS than Downton Abbey has done.
But I would tell you, can I tell you, and here, let me say this too. What I'd like to see is the president who works with the Congress and then praises the Congress. Because we have made running down Congress and running down public service a means of gaining control. Whether both parties have done it. Republicans have done it to Democrats, Democrats do it to Republicans. It's used as a means, but when all you're doing is running down the institution, you're really running down the country.
Who do you admire in Congress?
Patrick Meehan is somebody I admire. He's a member of Congress from Pennsylvania who's very thoughtful. Kurt Schrader is a member of Congress from Oregon. The first one's a Republican, the second one's a Democrat. I admire Mike Kelly from Pennsylvania. I admire Peter Welch. Peter Welch is a dear friend of mine. We worked together in the aftermath of Irene. He's got a great sense of humor. We found out we're both point guards. There's a certain view of the world for point guards. We're not the high scorers. We're the guys who are trying to get the ball into the high score so the team can win. You know, and I really like Peter, and he's got a great sense of humor. You know, the friendships I've made in No Labels, you know, they're meaningful to me because there's a real sincerity. I mean, we see what's going on, but yet, I mean, you look at just a couple days ago, Jared Polis and I co-authored a piece that appeared on broadband and how important broadband is for education and for everything, really. But, you know, Jared and I are voting, you know, yeah, I'm at the center of the House. Jared's very, and proud of it. He's a very left-wing Democrat. But yet, he's a friend. And yet we can write together on issues that we can find common ground.
There's just a sense that maybe your military service, your experience in dealing with all kinds of people has helped you build those kind of relationships across party lines. And
well, definitely. There's no question on that because in the Army there's only one color. It's green. And that's it. You know, and I think that helps because it's about dignity and respect. It's about a meritocracy, and it's about service more than anything else. And that's certainly with me. But I have to tell you that the formative years for me came in my home and in with the monks at Siena. I mean, you know, the Franciscan monks had a big impact on me as well. I really appreciated taking courses with them at Siena.
So this questioner asks, thank you for your military service. Do you get your health insurance from your job? And what is the family contribution to the program?
So I get my health care. If I get sick, I can go to the VA. I'm a combat veteran. All combat veterans, when they return home, can have 5 years of health care coverage. Believe it or not, the challenge we have is only about a third of the veterans sign up. So, you know, I lead by example with that. I tried to do a media event. I think some of the folks were even there that day. Tried to get more veterans to sign up. As a former soldier, my family gets their health care through TRICARE, which is a program that all our veterans have, and we thank the American people for that program.
Another healthcare question. The questioner says, my son lives in Burlington, Vermont. How can these young adults expect to pay for health insurance? He's getting hounded to pay $200 a month with a $6,000 deductible. He works for minimum wage. This is what he's offered. What do we do for young people in situations?
We're going to have to give them other options. I mean, this is the problem, is that, you know, what I long said, which was, I guess you could argue theoretical at the time, because I don't think it was theoretical, I read the bill, I mean, but you could argue it was political or something like that, is that the young folks, when they found out what actually was happening, they were gonna be mad about it, and now they're starting to figure it out. And, you know, one thing we can do is give them access to options across state lines, because there are plans out there. If you talk to young folks today, I mean, I remember what it was like to be 19. I mean, mortality seems like a concept when you're 19, you know, much less needing to go to the doctor. So the idea that they're going to pay thousands of dollars when they don't even think they need to see a doctor is one that's alien to them. They're probably going to pay the tax. But if we can actually get them a plan that recognizes their reality, then I think they'll buy more of it. For example, you know, this is actually somebody who was 63, not young, but I think it's still going to make the point. I was at an art festival one day in the fall in Hillsdale, and I met a lady, a wonderful lady who obviously was an artist, and she said, I'm a liberal Democrat, and my husband and I really like you. We just disagree with your position on the health care law because I really just need the health care. And she says, I have an emergency room only plan, and I pay $3.79 or something like that a month. And I said to her, I said, well, have you ever linked up with the Chamber of Commerce? And so when we got her hooked up with the Chamber of Commerce, I got an email from her one night late, I don't know, it was like 2,300 hours. She said, Chris, I just want to thank you. I actually now have a $10,000 deductible. All she wanted, she was going to turn 65 in a year and a half. She was scared to death because she actually had to go. She turned out to be negative, but she thought she might have breast cancer. So she was scared to death that she could lose everything. And she just wanted a plan. She was willing to pay a high deductible. I mean, they have a high for her. It made sense for her that she would have catastrophic coverage. She didn't mind if she had to pay up to the first $10,000, as long as she had something to cover her if she needed major surgery. So when she linked up with the chamber, she was able to get a quote for like less than that. It was like two something. She was so excited to get this plan when she wrote me, and it was heartbreaking. I had to write her back and be the one to tell her that the healthcare law, you're going to lose it. And she lost that plan. So, I mean, that's the problem. And again, the problem is mandating what's acceptable and unacceptable. You know, the ACA mandates that I think the max catastrophic is like 6,400, it may be 6,350. But the point is that we ought to allow the individual to make the call. Because if you're 23 years old, you may be okay with, I mean, the big fear if you're 23 is what if you need appendicitis or, you know, you live with that. And a lot of the young folks today, when they're faced with the calculus of this question, they just decide to run the risk. They decide to pay the tax. If the government, they're thinking, well, if the government catches up to them, they'll pay the tax. But we don't want that. What we want is more folks to want to buy. Not be forced to, but want to buy the insurance. So, you know, I think that we have to, why I say across state lines is I know that there were plans that I looked at, that I saw in other parts of the country that would allow for young folks to get a plan. I think, in fact, it's been a couple of years now since I looked at it, but there was a plan for under $1,000. And it had a high deductible, but I mean, for a young person, that may work for them. We ought to allow people to make that call. This artist who was 63, she was a year and a half from getting Medicare. She didn't want to get into big investments on a monthly payment. She was willing to run a little bit of risk, but she didn't want to run the risk of losing it.
We talked about pro-growth policies earlier.
Yeah.
This questioner asks in a few short words to try to help us understand the relationship between regulatory burdens and taxes and how that inhibits economic growth here and elsewhere.
Well, great question. Let me just say, this is another frustration that I have, candidly, because Republicans and Democrats talk past each other. You know, Republicans will tell you it's all supply side. Democrats say, no, it's all demand side. Where's our jobs? You know, the fact of the matter is it's both. I mean, my study of history is that there are 6 variables. If you work those 6 variables, you're going to get growth, okay? And the first 4 I call the impediments to growth because they generally, if you talk to a small business owner, that man or woman's going to tell you whether or not they're growing or not. They're going to mention these 4 factors. It's tax policy, and the code we have right now is complex and unfair. It's regulatory policy, not just federal policy, but it's the way we array. Federalism has so many virtues, but it has so many frustrations too. federal government will send you this way, the state government will send you this way, the zoning board, and before you know it, you can't see from end to end, and people get fatigued. It's energy costs, particularly in the Northeast, although in other parts of the country, upper Midwest as well, and then it's healthcare costs. So if we take action, when we do tax reform, it's going to be pro-growth. Think about it. 2/3 of the American people don't even itemize. And when you talk about closing loopholes and lowering rates, that's going to be more in the pocket for middle-class families that don't itemize. And middle-class families historically spend 96% of what their take-home pay is. And when they get an increase, 96% of that delta, historically speaking, they spend. So that's going to be your private sector stimulus for the economy. Regulatory. Here's the thing on the regulatory piece, and it's tied to trade, by the way. The regulatory process, we know we need a regulatory state. We need it to promote justice, to promote health and public safety. But the question is, do we have it optimized? Can we get to that space where we feel comfortable, where we're promoting these things we need to promote in a manner that also allows for a flourishing form of life? You know, you can imagine on a spectrum, right? You can be at one spot where you've expunged attenuated risk, significant risk, but you have no economic activity. And you can imagine another spot on that Pareto optimal, you know, or not Pareto, on this production possibilities frontier, where, you know, you could be all the way on the other axis, where you have so much opportunity, but yet you don't have justice, you don't have safety, you don't have public health. We have to find that, you know, that Pareto optimal on there that allows us to get at this piece. We're not there, I can tell you that. You just have to listen to small business owners. Now here's the interesting thing. There are some places where we have too much regulation, and we got other areas where we don't have enough. So there's not a simple answer to this. You know, we talked about fracking. I don't think we have that quite right. Now the issue on banking is Dodd-Frank, which was sold to us as a means of, you know, ending too big to fail, actually codified too big to fail and impacted Main Street. You can talk to Tom Hoy. You could talk to, I mean, our community banks were collateral damage in a bill that didn't solve the problem. We're going to have to break up the big banks. That's what we're going to have to do. I mean, we're going to have to, you're not going to be able to do it overnight, but over maybe the period of a decade, you're going to have to take this apart. Your commercial investment banks, I mean, there's just too much risk, in my view, looking at this piece. So
back to Glass-Steagall, how far back? What do you do? How do you break up it?
I think you're going to, like I said, you can't, I mean, you're not going to do it overnight, but I think what you're going to have to do is over the period of a decade is you're going to have to, if somebody wants to take on these huge risks, you know, these kind of investment banks, they shouldn't be tied together with your ordinary banks, your commercial banks that are just doing, you know, your particular actions for mom and pop. Because you're going to end up with a situation that what we've done over time, and keep in mind, in this case, you know, it was Phil Gramm, Chuck Schumer, and Bill Clinton. So when you have Republicans and Democrats working together on that, and, you know, we ended up in a situation where when you tie that together with some of the housing policies and some of the ways to try to still be profitable in doing that, we ended up with massive risk and significant turbulence in the financial services sector. And I just don't think that we can, if we're going to get serious about too big to fail, we're going to have to get serious about too big to fail. But then don't hit our community banks. They didn't cause the problem. I mean, you know, I went and talked to Ray O'Connor. Just like I did with farming, I went and sat with our community banks. And they listed for me all their new requirements that came with Dodd-Frank. Anybody who takes a phone call that has to do with a loan had to then get licensed. When they really only had, in one of the banks, they only had 4 people that actually did this business. They had to get 80 people licensed, which takes time out of their productivity. They had to pay for the licensing. And all of this, you know, came out of their bottom line, not to mention all their accounting. They had to hire new people to address the accounting. And before you know it, I mean, you're imperiling, and by the way, when you write vague statute, and then back it up with vague regulation that says nobody should get a loan that they can't pay back, or your bank's going to get significantly crushed. I mean, are you surprised when all of a sudden we can't get loans on Main Street? That's the problem here. I mean, so I'm getting to the point on growth. So it's taxes, regulation, it's healthcare costs, it's energy costs. Number 5 is investments. Now this is where traditionally Democrats talk about. But they're right that we have to do some smart investments. The Farm Bill, for example, is a very important investment for rural America. It's going to be good for upstate New York. We're going to see farms flourish. This is very important, right? Education. It's a key investment, including being a country that makes things with our hands and in supporting BOCES and all the trades, the building trades and the construction trades. Transportation, having a world-class infrastructure, including broadband. These are important investments. So, when the Democrats say we need to do that, they're right about that. But when Republicans say we need to look at tax reform and look at regulatory reform and relief, they're right about that. So let's stop talking past one another. The sixth variable is capital and markets. The capital I've partially addressed through Dodd-Frank, and we have issues with getting entrepreneurs the capital that they need to grow trade. Look, Jerry Solomon, he got it spot on. Jerry's one of the few that stood up. By the way, Jerry was right not only on NAFTA, he was right on Glass-Steagall. He was the guy that said, when they briefed Jerry on all this, and Jerry said, okay, I see what you're trying to do. Who pays for this if it goes under? Well, it's not going to go under. But who pays for it if it goes under? Well, we don't think it's going to go under. But who pays for it if it goes under? Well, it would be the taxpayer. We don't think it's going to go under. Jerry said, no. It's no coincidence that the year that Jerry left the Congress is the year that they took down Glass-Steagall, because Jerry was chairman of the Rules Committee. And Jerry stood up against NAFTA. And I'll tell you, he was a young man, a younger man anyways. And I didn't fully understand that. And I was trying to read about it and everything like that. But I have come to know more about this situation. And he was spot on.
That was a very tough call.
It was a tough call.
Tremendous pressure.
Here's the point on trade policies. The details matter. When people say to you free trade, there's not that. There's nothing free. It's the details. And we need trading agreements that put our manufacturers and producers on a level playing field. If we get a level playing field, I'm confident we'll win most of them. We'll win most of these competitions. But what hurts us is when we put our manufacturers and producers at a competitive disadvantage because we make conscious calls. We make conscious calls on our regulatory process. I was with Finch earlier today, and here's an example. So one of the things that Finch is dealing with is Boiler Act legislation that has a good intention. We're trying to get better in terms of the environment. And so, this regulation, which is going to go fully into effect at the end of 2015, will limit their choices in terms of the energy for Finch. Most immediately, it will take them away from oil. And now they're trying to find a way to deal with that. Well, among the competitors for Finch is, as it's been described to me, Europa. There's companies in Europe, and there's companies in the Far East. They're not held to the same standard. There's one environment. There's not multiple environments. There is one environment. If we're going to make a call on the regulatory process, we have to find a way to factor into our trade policy that we're making a statement as a people. We're saying as a people, this is important to us, and we think it's important to the world, that we do it certain. Now, quite frankly, I think we could have done Boiler Act differently. But if we are the people, as a people, we have a process. We have a republic. We have a process to make compromise and to get resolution on these issues. Well, when we make this call, then we need to factor that into our trade policy. And, this is what hurt us with NAFTA. In the months that led up to NAFTA, there was an increasing understanding that this relationship in its base form was going to be problematical in some areas. So we started hearing words about side agreements. Well, this is the big lesson learned on NAFTA. If you don't take the time to do it right the first time, you're not going to get the good side agreements later. And this is why I oppose fast track for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and I oppose in its current form the TPP, because I see this as potentially in the same vein that we saw in NAFTA. And think about this. We're actually now seeing our agricultural economy begin to thrive. We actually saw Ioxis move back from Japan. I want to